How many of you have walked through the door of your classroom on test day, sat down in your chair, nervously waiting for your teacher to hand you the test? Apprehensively, you take the test from your teacher, write your name on it in the right-hand corner, and then read question number 1. At that moment, you feel a rush of warmth moving through your face and a little uneasy as you tell yourself, I can't do number 1. You quickly go to question number 2, hoping that number 2 will be a little easier. But it's not. You can't do that one either. And when you can't do question number 3, panic ensues. Hey, fellow colleagues, my name is Max von Neumann, and if you have ever felt that way on a test, it doesn't have to be that way. Today, I'm here to share with you 2 techniques from the von Neumann method that you can put into practice instantly, the moment after this video finishes, to change your test scores quickly and noticeably.
3, 2, 1.
Many of us have been in that dreaded position where it feels like our brain has legs. And with those legs, your brain runs out the door when you need it the most. And that's after the previous night before the test, you were doing math problems with relative ease. You studied the material backward and forward, but you weren't able to show what you know on the test. Conversely, most everyone knows that person who doesn't seem to know the material that well, but they get their test back and they've scored 15 to 20 points higher than you did. Bad students do well, while good students do poorly. Or said more potently, but less grammatically correct, bad students do good, good students do bad. This is what I saw many decades ago while grading test papers. Often, in my earlier teaching days, students would come into my office, and after they left, I'd be pretty impressed with their mathematical abilities. I'd often think, that kid's going to ace the test. Of course, as you might expect, days later, that kid doesn't do as well as expected. Sometimes a student who has the potential of being an A student will get test scores anywhere south of 75%. On the other end of the spectrum, I'd have a student walk into my office who admittedly did not study much. I'd be a little worried as to how they do on the test. Test day comes, and they pull something over an 80%. Why is this so? It's because math tests do not necessarily measure one's math ability. What I'm saying is that if you get A's on tests, it does not necessarily make you a good mathematician. Conversely, if you bomb a test, it does not make you a terrible mathematician. Okay, before we get started, I'm going to make a confession. I, when I was very young, got A's on tests, but didn't know the material. Well, at least not the details. Essentially, what I'm saying is that I didn't know the material fundamentally, but I could do the problems reflexively, robotically. Think way back in your past. Did you, on a multiplication test, for example, 3 times 8, reflexively answer 24 because someone told you to memorize the multiplication tables? Or did you think that you were adding 3 sets of 8 and then proceeded by doing a bunch of additions? Of course, the von Neumann method advocates both ways of learning, but has evidence to support a particular order of learning in which mathematical and mechanical/robotical comes first. Most students are open to investigate mathematics once they know they can compute the correct answer and the pressure of a test grade is not a worry anymore. Admittedly, I learned the fundamentals after I fell in love with math. There is an overall way to become a great mathematician and to do well on tests, and that is the von Neumann method. Today, we entertain just 2 techniques from this method to assist in scoring better on math tests. Most likely 5 to 10 points higher given the same amount of study time. Before we get started, we must discuss one caveat. The one caveat is that you must still study, at least as much as you've always have. Of course, we advocate lots of study, but we will assume that you've studied enough to do relatively well on the test and not any less. Deciding to do well on a test is really the first step, but I will not digress. Aside from studying, just remember, becoming a great test taker is a learned skill. Okay, here we go. Step 1. The platitude study, study, study does not work. Naturally, studying helps in general, but many students who study their tails off do poorly on tests. The real word that solves the problem, and think of it in capitalized letters, is focus. Without focus, there is no study. Without focus, you invite distractions. Without focus, you do poorly on tests. Of course, you are the one who decides on what to focus on. For a math test, we choose to focus on getting maximum points out of the test. Now, focus sounds easy, but on a daily basis, our attention is being competed for by chattering ideas and decisions we feel we must entertain. Often, that chatter comes from thoughts that give us short-term gain, but prevents us from our ultimate goal. It needs to be said again and again that a lot of study time invested in random study is not as important as a shorter amount of focused time, especially a block of focused time. To become a great test taker, you will teach yourself how to focus. Yes, you do have to learn how, but it's not as easy as just doing it, but it's not that hard either. Here's our first lesson in focus. Imagine that you are going for a hike in the woods. You just leave your camper, smell the fresh air, and begin walking up a trail. Let's assume there are random thoughts running through your head. You are about 20 meters from the cabin when you see at a distance, let's say a couple football fields away, a giant hungry bear. Boom! That's focus. You're not thinking about what time it is. You're not thinking about the homework you have to do later. And you're not thinking about what you're going to eat for lunch. You're just thinking about survival. All your senses are focused on what that bear can do to you. True focus has one lane, one point in space. It cannot be occupied by more than one thought. If you press 2 keys on a computer at the same time, only one letter will show up first. Your computer can only recognize one letter as being typed in first, not 2. So the remedy to poor test taking is to fill that focus space with positive chatter. It's generally understood that almost all students start to calm down 20 to 30 minutes into their test. So what if you could be at that calm point earlier in the test? Or even better, calm throughout the test. It's possible. 30 minutes before the test time, tell yourself that this test is not life or death. It's not a bear chasing you. It's been said that comfort is our enemy. Comfort allows us to be afraid of something that is truly not life or death. There is a famous quote by Winston Churchill which says, "Fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. Failure is not fatal." We, from Alien Institute, will not fear the idea of fear. We will aggressively replace that defective idea with constructive process. positive chatter. Just remember, nerves, stress, panic, and fear can do us no good on a test. You actually have a better chance not caring at all. Yes, I know it's hard to let go. It's like holding on to a ledge of a tall building and the firemen tell you to let go so you can fall safely into the safety net. It takes faith, but for a test, it's essential to let go in order to get rid of competing messages in your head. Let's face it, if you're honest, at the beginning of a test, the voice that is worried about failing or graduating or needing a certain score on the test is much louder than the voice that is telling us how to solve a particular problem. So here's the trick. Chatter to yourself. You must fill that space in your mind with the true task you want to do before other competing ideas have a chance to take over that focus space. Before I teach you when and how to chatter, let's do a little experiment. Look at your video screen now and focus on the color red. For 10 seconds, I want you to picture the color red and at the same time, repeat the word red 20 times. How many of you during that 10 seconds thought of the color blue? Probably very few, if any. I created this experiment to give instant confidence to us Alien Institute students that we can control our own thoughts. Now, what is positive chatter? Positive chatter is a dramatic mathematical story of useful information and procedures which fills the single position of focus so that no other thoughts can be considered before and during a test. Positive chatter is the dramatic mathematical story that you begin to tell yourself 30 minutes before the test. The mathematical story can be so dramatic that in your mind it can be performed on a Broadway stage. All of us have an incredible math story within us, and it's very personal and it needs to be told. Begin your story with areas in which you have improved or where you have faltered, but have control. Telling yourself you will not make that mistake on the test. For example, if you've been dropping negative signs on your answers, tell yourself loudly in your head to watch out for that on the test. Imagine a bunch of traps set in a forest, but you have a map telling you where they are. You tell yourself as you're moving through the forest to keep alert and keep looking as to where those traps are. If you can focus enough to avoid pitfalls in life or pitfalls on a video game, then you can do the same for math. Talk to yourself in terms that the questions are formatted in. Essentially, how does your textbook ask questions? Most questions have particular instructions. Keep repeating them and connecting them to particular ways of answering problems. We will discuss this more in part 2. Continue having a rapid conversation in your head, analogous to repeating the color red from our earlier experiment. Your story has meaning to you because it's reminding you of your strengths. Talk to yourself in your mind nonstop and so loudly so that no other thought can compete in your mind. As the teacher's handing out the tests, aggressively tell yourself the story of how you're going to do the math. Remember, you can only really feel one emotion at a time. You can't be happy and angry at the same time. When you're aggressive, then you have filled that space of emotion with charging aggressively and positively forward. As soon as you get your test, quickly write your name and then start writing a library on the test. The library will have any formulas or areas you need to remember, and you will use this library as reference for potential problems on the test. When you're telling your story to yourself, it is really important to tell your story as if you're teaching someone. Teaching someone, even a non-existent someone, takes the pressure off you. Additionally, being able to teach someone something takes a higher level of understanding, or at least a higher level of skill. Keep repeating to yourself all the ways that you have learned on how to process math problems from the chapter you have studied. Start moving that pencil. While you are chattering to yourself, read that first problem and then actually write what you think the instructions want you to do. Recall similar problems from your homework and how you would work them, and then attempt the same procedure on your test problem. Don't worry whether it's the correct way or not. You just need to get some written work under your belt. Write something for number one, even if you feel it could be wrong. Later on, you can come back to it if you think it needs to be fixed. A later test problem may give you a better idea about how to do problem one better. After you answer a few more problems, your story gets stronger, your voice gets louder, and you begin to develop a rhythm. You find yourself in the zone. Remember, if you are listening to an interesting story, it's impossible to get distracted. So keep that story loud, consistent, and keep that repeating voice in your head. I know in the military, the squeaky wheel gets replaced, but for math tests, in your head, the loudest and squeakiest thought gets the grease. It gets the attention. In the wild, the lion that takes its eye off its prey loses it. In baseball, the batter that is worried about getting hit with the pitch rarely hits the ball. The test taker that focuses on failure will often fail. Do not be that person. Don't worry about something that hasn't happened yet, such as failing a test. Focus on process. Focus on the mathematical story your mind needs to hear and your mind needs to visualize. It is critical that you chatter a lot. Chatter to yourself beginning at the point 30 minutes before the test begins, all the way up until you turn in the test. Just chatter.
Yes, there it is. 50 mathematical ideas you really need to know. If you do not have it, obtain it by striking the link below. It could be considered a textbook for our training.
The second technique to improving test scores is a little different. How many of you have gotten a math test back after it's been taken and you look at the grade and you're extremely disappointed? Furthermore, the professor proceeds to go over the test and you realize as he does the problems on the board, you know how to do most of the problems you got wrong. You start to realize that you didn't connect the problem with the process you were supposed to do. In other words, you knew the steps to complete the problem, but you didn't know that the question was asking you to do those steps. I realized a long time ago in a class I taught that it is possible to not know the question you are being asked. One day, I tried an experiment in one of my college classes. After we covered a section in the class, I had everyone open up their books and look at a page where there were bunches of problems. Of course, for every bunch of problems, there were instructions for each problem set. For this particular day, I think the first instruction went to the first 20 problems. I told the class to start working the 20 problems as I walked around the class. When I noticed that most of the class was around problem 5 or 6, I told them not to panic, that we were not having a pop quiz, but to close their books. This is where the story gets interesting. After closing their books, I asked a classroom full of approximately 30 students if any of them could tell me the specific instructions that went with the problems they were working. I asked them to write down the instructions on a piece of paper to the best of their knowledge, or to write that they couldn't remember. I told them any response was acceptable. As soon as I got the responses, some of them that were pretty funny, I realized something. From a classroom of approximately 30, not one student could remember the specific instructions. After we talked about it, students said that they did problem 1 based on my example on the board. Then we concluded that problem 2 was done based on number 1, and then problem number 3 was done based on number 2, and so on and so forth. Now let's fast forward to the math test. Often, a math test has one instruction along with one, maybe 2 types of problems that go with that specific instruction. No examples, no previous problems, just you and the instruction. Nothing else. This means the instructions are vital. The vocabulary is vital. Unfortunately, when doing homework, we don't treat the instructions as being vital, but they are. Fortunately for us, many books use very similar instructions or prompts, so if we can connect that instruction to a corresponding action or process, that could mean huge improvements for your test scores. Moreover, most teachers tend to use the exact or very similar language when creating test questions in math. They are not trying to trick you. So how do we connect those instructions to a procedure with very little effort? There are many techniques, but I will mention the 2 quickest ways that I have helped students of mine in the past. The first way is to repeat the instructions for the problem set with focus at the beginning of each problem being done. That means if you have a set of 20 homework problems, you will read the instructions to that problem set 20 times. By doing this, you are creating a reflex, a neurolink. In my terminology, I call this a CLIP. It stands for Question Links Initial Process. Of course, if the question links the full process, that's even better. As you are working your homework, it also pays off to chatter to yourself the steps you are doing to complete the problem. Keep connecting question to process. For example, in a college algebra book, there's a section on linear equations. The first 10 questions in this section leads with the instructions that read, in exercise 1 through 10, find the slope of the line that passes through the given points. You will read that same instruction 10 times, once before doing each of the 10 problems. Additionally, when you start to do the problem, start chattering to yourself about the process. For example, I would say, first I have 2 points. Okay, that means I need the slope formula. Okay, what is the slope formula? The slope formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, did I label my first point x1 and y1 and my second point x2, y2, ... And this conversation goes on in your head loudly and consistently until you finish all the problems before you. Again, neurolink question to process. If the instructions on the test are the same or similar, you will instantly dive into action, and more likely than not, you will act in the right manner, especially if the chatter in your head is repeating those instructions and making good connections. The second way I advise students to improve their connection to the instructions is to make flashcards. One side has the exact question from the book, and the other side explains in general the steps, the initial or full process on how to solve those types of problems. Keep in mind that a particular instruction or question could have several different types of problems and processes that go with it, so your card should reflect all the types of problems and solving techniques on them. If on a test you are not sure what to do for a question, do something. Start using one of the techniques on the problem that first comes to mind. Even if it's the wrong technique, you will discover it relatively quickly when you hit a dead end, and there's a good possibility that it will spur your brain to the actual technique to use. Okay, let's recap this thing so you can get out there and roll over your test like a tank over a tin can. Step 1, start doing your homework by reading the instructions to the problem set before every single problem. The question should link to process, the steps used to answer that particular question. Step 2, chatter to yourself about each step you are doing in order to solve the homework problem. In other words, talk to yourself about the process loudly and consistently in your head, even during homework. Step 3, 30 minutes before the test, tell yourself you have nothing to lose. It is not life or death. You are just going to charge forward. And finally, step 4, chatter. After telling yourself you have nothing to lose, start chattering to yourself. You will chatter about the instructions. You will chatter about how to do particular problems. You will chatter about formulas. As you're taking the test, you are chattering to yourself as to how you are doing each problem. If you are chattering as to ways to do the problem properly, it's impossible to think about anything else. Chatter and chatter some more until you finally turn in that test. Well, that does it for these techniques. Now get out there and roll strongly. Start experimenting with your math. Work to understand why math illuminates hidden ideas. Right now, math is the best thing we have to make sense of this mysterious universe in which we live. And here, as members of Alien Institute, it is our passion and our venture to make sense of that very same universe in which we live. Hey team members, understanding great minds will add to our goal to become visionaries. Don't forget to comment, share, and strike the like. But most importantly, strike that subscribe button to become part of our elite team.